This is a video tutorial for a relief sculpture. This is using a side profile. This should be a picture of yourself. For me, I just printed off a picture of a side profile, just of a random person. So the first step that you need to do is you need to take a Sharpie and you're going to outline just the edges, the very outside edges of the side profile, and you're going to trace on a blank sheet of paper using pencil. You are then going to make a 1/2 inch border going around the entire paper. If any of your edges of your silhouette kind of touch the border, that is totally fine. If you need to go a little bit shorter on the border, make it a little bit smaller, maybe like a 1/4 inch, that would be fine too. But for the purposes of this project, 1/2 inch is about what you want. I'm going over in marker for all of my sections, my edges of my border, because I want that to stand out against the pencil marks that I'm going to be doing later. So you'll see later in the video that I'll be using pencil, but I'm going over with just a marker. This is just a marker that I had. If you have a Sharpie, that works just as well. You just want something that's a little bit dark and that will stand out against pencil. So if it's not filled in perfectly, that's totally fine. You just want at least the edges of your border very neat and like crisp and dark. So you are also going to broaden your pencil like outline of your silhouette by using that same Sharpie or marker, and I'm trying to make it about the same size as my border, so around 1/2 inch. If it's a little bit less than 1/2 inch, that's totally fine. So I'm just going around. You'll notice that at the part where like the hair is gathered at the top of the head, the bun, that was a little close to the border that I had. So I kind of went in a little bit more on the inside of the silhouette and made it thicker there, rather than having it touch the actual 1/2 inch border. I'm then just filling this in with the same marker or Sharpie because I want this to stand out. If it's not, perfectly filled in, that's totally fine. If there's little white spots, it's all right. Because this paper, you're not actually going to be keeping it. This is just like as a reference, a guide for you to cut your pieces. So the next thing that I'm doing is I am adding, you can almost think of them as like support beams. So I'm making 1/2 inch sections that connect from the silhouette to the border at the edge of the paper. So I'm doing it in pencil first, just so that if I have to erase, I'm able to. If it's not perfectly 1/2 inch, totally fine. I am then going over again in that same marker or Sharpie, just to make sure that it's dark enough and I'm able to, be able to see it clearly against the pencil. So you will need a pencil for this next part. What you are going to do is you are going to go around the edges of all of your lines. And if you've ever seen a topographical map, that's kind of what it's going to end up looking like. So previously we had been using 1/2 inch kind of increments. Your lines for this part should only be 1/4 of an inch. So they need to be a little bit smaller because you want to be able to fit several lines. You'll notice at the bottom that I accidentally extended it into the border. So I'm just erasing this, and I'm making sure that I have that 1/4 inch clearance. So I've done that once, and then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna add kind of another layer, so to speak. And I'm gonna go another 1/4 inch in, and I'm just going around all of the lines. So all of the little curves that I have, any little like divots, I'm following that path with my pencil. And it should be another 1/4 inch in. So towards the end of this, you should end up with maybe 8, 9, 10, maybe even 12 sections. So right here, you'll see that area where the hair is, the bun, there's not actually enough room for me to continue that line in. So I just stopped at the like entrance of it and brought it back around. But in that little space, it's a little too big, so I've added just a little, another little layer there. So it's okay if the layers get broken up a little bit. They don't all have to connect. If you have little small areas where you're not able to fit like the 1/4 inch sections, that's okay. So this is what it will look like about for the inside of the silhouette. So just like how we did the inside of your face or your head, you are going to make those same 1/4 inch little layers in the sections surrounding your head. So I'm going around every little section. You're not going to be able to create as many. So on the inside of the head, that's a larger space. So I was able to fit in around like 12 layers. Around the, neck and the face, I may only get 1 or 2 layers. That is totally fine. So this is what it may end up looking like. So the next part, you are going to now number your layers. So the closest to the border, to the black lines, will be labeled number 1. And then as you go in, you are going to increase the number size. So you can see 1 is closest to my Sharpie, and then the very innermost layer is 12. So it gets higher in number as you go in. You're gonna do the exact same thing to all the other layers. So even the ones that are outside of your head, you're gonna number those too. So I'm starting with 1 being the closest to the Sharpie, and then you can see I have number 4 as the innermost layer. And then you are going to just repeat that process until your whole page you have numbered. This next part of the project, you are going to be using construction paper. So you need to choose some kind of color scheme, at least 3 colors, and they need to repeat. So the amount of numbers that you have, so I have 12, you are going to plus 1, and that is how many papers you will need. So I ended up with 13 papers total because I have 13 layers. I chose kind of inspired by a bee colors, so it was black, yellow, white, black, yellow, white. You are also going to need some kind of paper clip. Bowl clips work as well, but you need something to hold your construction paper and the paper together. So you need to arrange your top paper with your silhouette so that it is aligned with one corner of your construction paper. Your construction paper most likely will be larger than the paper that you were drawing on. So you will have to cut the excess space kind of at the top and side. You will also need an X-Acto knife. I recommend using an X-Acto knife and not a box cutter. A box cutter is not going to let you get those very small, fine details. So the very first layer, you are only cutting the section with the highest number. So for me, this is section 12. So it's only that very small, tiny little spot in the very center of my silhouette. So it's just 12. That's the only part I'm cutting. So you can see that I have the top and side of the construction paper peeking through. So I'm going to use my ruler to line up with the edge of the actual printer paper that I was drawing on. And I'm going to use my X-Acto knife and cut off this excess paper. If you would prefer, you can just mark it with a pencil, and when you kind of take off the paper clips, you can just go back with scissors and cut the excess paper off. I just chose to do it with an X-Acto knife and a ruler because I already had the paper clip together, and I just found this easiest for me. But if you would prefer, you can totally cut it with scissors and just use a pencil to mark where you need to cut. So now that my first layer is done, I'm going to remove my paper clips. And to make sure that I remember what layer that is, that was 12, so I'm going to flip to the back of my paper and I'm going to write a 12 on it. So later when I am attaching all of the pieces together and gluing, I know what layers go where. So I'm going to choose my next color and I'm going to repeat the process. So I'm taking my paper and I'm paper clipping it to just the corner of the construction paper. So I'll have a little bit of that space on the top and sides. And then now I am just cutting section 11. This is 11 for me, and may be a different number for you guys, but you're just cutting the next largest section. So for me, it's just that innermost part in the silhouette. And now you can see that my hole is a little bit bigger. So I'm almost chipping away at each section, every layer. Again, I'm going back with a ruler and I am just cutting the excess paper for the construction paper. If it's not perfect, that's totally fine. You just don't want the ends sticking out because you are going to be gluing all of the layers on top of each other at the very end. You will then repeat this process for each layer. So for me, this was layer number 11. So I'm going to flip to the back of this paper and I'm going to write an 11 on it so that I don't forget. You can then see that when I stack the papers on top of each other, you'll be able to see kind of the layers. So each time you're cutting away more of your paper. So this is an example of what it could look like your top paper after you've cut most of your sections. So one thing to note, the very first couple of papers, you're only gonna cut just basically the center of your silhouette, but as you cut more, once you get to the layers around 3 or 4, you are actually gonna end up cutting the spaces around the silhouette as well. So you can see in this top right corner, I've cut that number 4 section already. So if you want to see what that will look like on your actual construction paper, it would look like this. So you can see where I've cut the spaces on the inside of the silhouette, but you can also see that I've cut spaces around as well. So when it ends up stacked on top of each other, it'll look something like this. So that top white layer of construction paper is actually the Sharpie or marker lines from that very top paper that we started with. So that's just the very basic outline of the side profile silhouette. So when it comes to the actual assembly of this project, to make it a relief sculpture, you are going to be adding cardboard between each layer. I would recommend using a large piece of cardboard under your very first layer, which your first layer of construction paper should have no holes on it. It should just be a blank sheet of paper. I recommend putting the cardboard underneath so that way you're able to move and pick up the sculpture. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit floppy. So I'm just taking a regular glue stick. If you would prefer, you can use liquid glue. I just like the glue stick because it's not as messy. It also helps to not wrinkle the paper as much. So the more like firm your construction paper is, the better quality it is, the less it will kind of crinkle and warp under the glue. So I'm just smoothing this down onto the cardboard base. And I noticed that I had a little bit like sections peeking through, so I just cleaned those up with a box cutter. So I am now starting with my largest layer. So this was number 12. And to kind of elevate and create the layers, I'm cutting pieces of cardboard, which I'm going to glue onto the first layer to kind of like elevate it and bump it up. So I'm just arranging them so that the cardboard does not peek through that little hole that I have. I'm using the glue stick again, and I'm just attaching it to that very first base layer. Once I've finished gluing down the cardboard pieces, I'm just checking to make sure that this is my largest numbered layer. So looking at the back, I see that it says number 10 and that this is the correct layer. And I realized that I started putting glue down on the paper, but your paper is not necessarily going to touch all of the cardboard pieces. So to save yourself some time and not waste as much glue, you're actually going to want to put the glue on top of the cardboard because that is the only thing that's actually going to touch the paper. So I'm just putting a, generous amount of glue on each section. Don't be afraid to go heavy with the glue. You really want to make sure it sticks. So I'm lining up the paper so that it's in line with the first layer, and I'm just gently rubbing to make sure that it is attached completely. So I am now going to do the next section. So I'm checking to make sure that that is number 9. That's the next section that I need to do. And I am cutting some cardboard to attach. For the sections, the layers where you don't have a lot of openings, I recommend using like longer strips of cardboard just because it's a little bit easier and you don't really have to worry about it peeking through just yet. When it comes to later sections, you will have to cut your cardboard into pretty small pieces so that way you can't see it, but for now you can use larger strips. So I'm again just adding glue to the cardboard, quite a bit. You want enough to make sure that it'll stick. You really don't want this falling apart. So I'm just setting this down on the paper. When you are adding the cardboard and your pieces of paper, you want to make sure that you don't press as hard as possible. You want to just gently press it. because if you're pressing down very, very hard, you may collapse some of the layers, so to speak. So you really want to be able to see that kind of like space. You can actually see right now that I have like a shadow from the light, because the layers are not directly on top of each other. They are kind of elevated from that, from the cardboard. So don't press too hard when you're attaching. You just want to like gently rub it. So for this project specifically, I'm having students write or doodle or draw around the edge for 3 layers. So I chose this purple layer as one of my layers that I was going to write. And since these are kind of Halloween colors and it is fall time when we are doing this, I decided to write about how Halloween was one of my favorite holidays to celebrate. Because at this moment I forgot the word celebrate and I had to think of it. So you may not be able to write a lot on some of the smaller layers, but when you get to the larger layers where you have more kind of sectionings and more cuts and larger spaces, you'll be able to write or draw more. So that was me just checking to make sure, how it was gonna look. So I've added the cardboard and now I'm just gently lining up and placing it down. Just gently rubbing to make sure that it's sticking. Don't press hard, otherwise your layers may not be spaced correctly. So, I was just double checking to make sure that my next layer was not going to cover any of the words that I wrote. I probably could have written on that layer a little bit smaller, because the next layer that I do, depending on what angle you're looking at this artwork, you may not be able to see all of the words, which is totally fine, but maybe something to consider if you are writing something, write in a smaller font, smaller size. So I did not complete this project entirely. I just didn't have the chance to yet, but you are just going to repeat that same process. Here I am showing you how for the very last layer, the size of cardboard you're going to use is going to be smaller. Just that very last layer, the outline, you're going to need to use small cardboard.